Hello and welcome to Unproductive, a productivity series for the rest of us. This month we are talking about calendars and specifically how to take ownership of your calendar and some different styles that might work for different people of working with your calendar. I've read and listened to a lot of different advice about calendars and kind of specific methods, and to me they more or less fit into these three buckets. There might be other groups that you could think of, but these are just the three that kind of resonated for me. So the first one is I kind of think of it as sacred calendar, or your calendar is a sacred space. So this would be a style where you only put something on your calendar if it is a thing that is definitely happening at that time, and it's a problem if it doesn't. So you would reserve your calendar for appointments, for things that are definitely going to happen. Maybe you might sometimes put a specific chunk of work if there's a hard due date and you know you have to work on that, but mostly you would be reserving your calendar for things that you are definitely going to do at a time. So it might be an appointment, it might be something like like a specific outing or an errand maybe you would put on there, but you would be less likely to put work on X on your calendar, and so you would leave space around the specific appointments and meetings. This is a good style, I think, if you have a lot of appointments and meetings and specific things. This can be a good style because you might want to at a glance just be able to see when you are not scheduled. This can be a good style if you have to, I would think carefully about this, but if you really have to be available for people to schedule things with you, then you might use this style so that people can see when they can schedule with you. Although I think you can also use one of the other styles I'm going to describe and use sharing settings on your calendar to kind of permission your availability at different levels. So not necessarily letting everyone consider unscheduled time to be available to them, but maybe there's specific people you have to do that with, and you give them access to see what your different calendar blocks are, and then you tell them it's okay to schedule over this. This style can be like, I think this is kind of the style that David Allen recommends in his book Getting Things Done. If you have the philosophy of kind of, if it's on the calendar, then it is, again, kind of sacred or so important that if you put too much on a calendar, you might water it down. So, like, one approach is to say, it's not going to have meaning if things show up on my calendar and I don't do them, so I'm going to have my next actions list that I can always work through at any time and prioritize that in different ways, but I'm not going to put a due date or stick it on my calendar unless that is 100% accurate. So it might be useful for you if you do tend to not necessarily do things that are scheduled and you're having trouble getting that small percentage of things that absolutely have to happen at a particular time, you're having trouble pulling that out from your to-do list, then it might be useful to use this approach. The second style that I'm thinking of, I would call kind of general blocks. So this is, if you've heard of the idea of time blocking, this would fall into that general blocks. So in this method, you would put time on your calendar, put in a block for a specific type of work or a specific type of activity, but you wouldn't necessarily schedule, say, a particular project. So an example of this might be if you do YouTube, general blocking would be, I am going to film Fridays from 2 to 5, and I put in a block for filming, but I don't write in that block the specific video I'm going to work on. I don't write in that block exactly what I'm doing. I just say this is like filming time. And you can even be more general. Like I was watching Amy Landino did a video on time blocking and kind of talked about how she has particular days that she has to be on. So she has to be like, made up and dressed up and looking nice. So she's going to be on camera. So those are also good days for her to take in-person meetings maybe, or anything where somebody needs to see her. And then she has kind of audio days where it's like doing press on the phone or recording podcast episodes. So depending on what your kind of work is, you might be able to do that kind of thing where days could have a theme, or parts of days could have a theme. This could work well for you if you tend to find that different things you do in your life and work require a different kind of focus than others. So like, I don't know about you, but I find it really hard in my work now. I'm doing more and more calls, and when the calls end a little early, I find it really hard to like switch my mental focus from calls and like consulting and advice to 10 minutes of like quick work on a project or checking my email or something. Like it's hard for me to switch my focus. So I like to put in blocks of time that are like, I'm going to be processing my inbox and doing organizational type stuff, and that requires one kind of brain. And then calls go here, and just take little breaks at the end if they end early. So that works well for me because then I can turn my focus to one type of work. So it might be that you and you can, doing this kind of general blocks works particularly well if you know that you are more or less focused at certain times of day, if you know that you are more or less on at certain times of day, if you know that towards the end of the week you want to do a particular kind of work, anything like that. You can intentionally block your calendar so that you're at your best for the best kind of thing. So like, I just stopped taking calls before 10 because I really find it useful in the morning to be able to kind of do my own thing. But I also, I like calls sometimes in the afternoon because it's when I'm the most tired and unfocused. But if I have a scheduled call, that works better for me than having to self-motivate myself when I'm really tired. So I will schedule in work blocks, which again, if I'm sharing my calendar, except for certain people, they're going to see me as busy during my work blocks. And so it's not that I put call on my calendar, but I make sure that the free times where people have access to send calendar invites, I make sure that those are good times for calls. And then I just block off. And I'm very general. Like, I put in something like work block. And all that means is that I want to have some alone time to do work. And typically on the day, I'll then slot in using my to-do list, and I do use getting things done. I will figure out, okay, this is something that I want to focus on. Here are 5 or 6 options. Let's pick this one for this work block. And so I like the freedom of being able to decide on the day exactly what I'm working on and reprioritize constantly, but knowing that I have enough time. And then I will also review, I think if you do these general blocks, one thing that can be good is to review at the beginning of the week, or maybe a couple times a week, how much stuff you have building up. So for example, if you have a lot of email building up, you might schedule in some email processing time at a time that works for you. Then the third kind of calendar approach that I think of is more specific blocks. So this is not the sacred calendar approach. It's not only appointments and meetings. You are scheduling in work blocks where you don't want to be interrupted. But in this approach, you're scheduling them for specific things. So here, rather than picking from the menu, you're putting in, like, here's 2 hours to work on project A, or 30 minutes to work on this progress memo, or I'm going to put in, an hour for office hours, or whatever it is, depending on what you're doing. But this is more, it requires a little more upfront work because, at the beginning of the week or whenever you need to, like, look through your to-do list and schedule things. But you can also do it on the fly. Like, if you say to somebody on a meeting, like, okay, I will do this by the 15th. You might at that moment schedule in 2 hours before the 15th to work on it. And I think when you use this method, you have to be careful. I would say it can be really good, and I use kind of a hybrid between general and specific blocks. And I find that blocking in specific work time is great if there is a due date on something that is a hard deadline, or that I've told somebody I'd do something by a particular date. Because in my to-do list, I could put in due dates, but I kind of hold the due date sacred on my to-do list. But if I say I'll get something done in a particular amount of time, I will actually schedule a work block for it on my calendar. So there's a little more flexibility there. I might move it, but typically, like if I tell somebody I'll do something within a couple of weeks, I'll schedule time within 1 week. And I know that usually I schedule the time block a little early, so if I need to shift it, it's okay. It's not a hard deadline. But this can be good for getting things that you really have to get done, things that you've promised people. And it might be useful if you find the kind of menu of options overwhelming. So if looking at a to-do list is actually really hard for you, and you find that when you look at it, you're just like, oh my God, I have a lot of stuff, then putting in specific blocks of time on your calendar can be useful. Particularly if you find that you're somebody, who is kind of good at following instructions, or likes having guidance or direction, or, a specific thing to do. And particularly if you feel this is lacking in your life, like you have a fairly hands-off manager, or you work for yourself and you need the kind of artificial, like, do the thing, then putting in specific time blocks in your calendar can be really useful, because you're probably the personality type who would stick to that time block and will do it if it's scheduled. And then you just have to hold that as definitely going to do it. Of course, stuff comes up, you can scoot that block over. So those are some general approaches. I'll just add on a couple things here at the end that you also might want to consider. One is whether you want to have one or more calendars. So, a lot of people have a work and a personal, depending on how your life is divided. You may find that useful, or you may not find that useful. I used to have, because I just thought it was the way people do things, I used to have a Google Calendar for personal and an Outlook calendar for work. And about a year ago, I combined the two, and I just decided that I didn't mind having personal stuff in my work calendar. If I didn't want people to see what it was, I could just mark it private in Outlook, and that, oh my God, works so much better for me. But on the flip side, Google, I was able to do that when a particular relationship ended, because, Google works really well for personal sharing. Being able to share a calendar with somebody who's not in a particular organization. So I had a particular relationship where we shared our calendars, and when the relationship ended, I was like, great, I don't need to do this anymore. But if you do have, partners, friends, kids, people with whom you share calendars, then you may kind of be forced to use something outside of your work system. The thing that I found useful about merging my calendars is that I have one single source of truth. There is one calendar that is the calendar, and it helps me to not accidentally, for example, schedule a work meeting when I'm going to be going out to dinner with somebody. A word of advice for that, if you do, whether or not you have multiple calendars, because you can also, of course, like, have a personal calendar and then put certain things on work as just busy. But a word of advice is always schedule in travel time or prep time. I always forget this, and then I end up with a call right up until the point I'm supposed to be at a restaurant with somebody. So, or if you travel, make sure that you actually block off the time that it takes to get to the airport. I used to just let the automatic notifications come in and allow the airline email to put the calendar invite, put the calendar block on my calendar for the flight, which is fine, and I still do that. But now I also add in time to travel, because I really don't like taking calls when I'm in the metro and I might be underground getting the airport, or if I'm at the airport. It's just, I have auditory processing disorder, it's not a good time for calls. So make sure you block off transit time like that. And then I kind of hinted at this earlier, but think about who has access to your calendar and who you share calendars with, and keep in mind that you can always have different levels of access. So pretty much every calendar system has at least 3 levels, like free, like no access, free busy, meaning they can see if you have something but not what it is, and then full access where they can see everything. And of course there's also like delegated access and stuff like that, but those are the 3 basic levels. And I, as a rule, give access to my calendar to people, like full access to my calendar to people on my team, because I'm okay if they want to like schedule over work blocks, or if they're having a really hard time finding a meeting time for a group, then they can see the kinds of things that I have scheduled and be like, oh, I know that you can reschedule a one-on-one check-in with a direct report, but I'm not going to try to schedule over another call with a bunch of people on it. So that can be handy, especially if other people are scheduling things for you. But then I do free busy for everybody else, and again, that way I can use work blocks to be like, no, I'm not taking calls at this time. So maybe a little biased. The whole point of the Unproductive series is to be kind of applicable to different people, so I want to acknowledge this may be a little biased towards the 9-to-5 kind of working, where you have lots of calls and you work in an organization, but I hope that it also applies to other kinds of work or personal stuff that you might do. If you have any questions about calendaring or any thoughts that you'd like to share, ways to use your calendar, feel free to leave a comment below, like this video, and don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy content like this. All right, thanks.